The morning dawn broke over Montana territory with a violence of color that seemed too beautiful for the grief it illuminated. And Isaac Quinn heard the weeping before he saw the woman crumpled beside the shallow river like a discarded dress. He had been riding since midnight, pushing his gelding hard after 3 weeks of driving cattle up from Wyoming, every muscle in his body screaming for rest, but something about those sobs stopped him cold. Isaac dismounted slowly, his boots crunching on the frost-hardened earth as he approached the riverbank where willows hung like curtains between him and the source of that heartbreak. The woman sat with her knees drawn up, her dark hair falling loose around shoulders that shook with each sob, and she did not seem to notice him at all. "Madam." His voice came out rougher than he intended, gravelly from disuse and trail dust. She startled, her head snapping up to reveal a face streaked with tears and dirt, eyes red-rimmed and wide with something between fear and exhaustion. She looked young, maybe 23 or 24, with delicate features that spoke of better days than whatever had brought her here. Her dress was torn at the hem and shoulder, good fabric gone to ruin, and her hands were scraped raw. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking, "please just leave me be." Isaac should have mounted up and ridden on. He had his own troubles waiting in Butte, debts to settle and a ranch to save, but he found himself lowering himself to the cold ground beside her instead, keeping a respectful distance but close enough that she would know she was not alone. "Cannot do that," he said simply. She turned to look at him then, really look at him, taking in his weathered face and the genuine concern in his dark eyes. Something in her expression crumbled further, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "They are all dead," she said, the words hollow. "My father, my brother, everyone in our wagon. The fever took them one by one, and I could do nothing but watch." Isaac felt his chest tighten. He had seen fever sweep through wagon trains before, had lost his own mother to cholera when he was barely 15. "How long ago?" 3 days since my father passed. I buried him yesterday, but the ground was so hard and I had no proper tools." She looked down at her damaged hands. "I just kept digging until I could not dig any more." "Where are you trying to get to?" "But my father's brother owns a mercantile there, or he did 5 years ago when we last heard from him." "Daniel Lancaster, do you know him?" Isaac shook his head slowly. "Cannot say I do, but has grown considerable in recent years. The copper mining brought in a lot of folks." He paused, studying her face in the growing light. The sun was climbing now, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. "What is your name?" "Delilah Lancaster." "Isaac Quinn." He tipped his hat slightly, an oddly formal gesture given their circumstances. "I am headed to Butte myself. Got a small ranch about 10 miles outside town, been away driving cattle to market. You should not be traveling alone, Miss Lancaster. These roads are not safe for a woman without protection." "I have nowhere else to go," she said simply, "and no money to hire protection even if I wished it." Isaac stood, brushing dirt from his worn trousers. "I am not asking for money. I am saying I will take you to Butte, help you find your uncle if he is still there." He held out his hand to her. "But we should get moving. This is exposed ground, and there are wolves in these parts, not to mention the humankind." Delilah stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment, and Isaac could see the war playing out behind her eyes. Trust did not come easy, especially not for a woman alone who had just lost everything. But finally, she placed her small, torn-up hand in his calloused palm and let him pull her to her feet. "Thank you," she whispered. "No thanks needed yet. Let me see to those hands first." He led her to where his horse stood grazing on the sparse grass, and from his saddlebag he produced a small tin of salve and clean bandages. His sister had pressed them on him before she married and moved to California. insisting a man alone needed to know how to tend his own wounds. Isaac had never imagined he would be using them on a stranger's hands, but he worked carefully, cleaning the dirt from her scraped palms and wrapping them with surprising gentleness for such rough hands. "You did all that digging by yourself?" he asked as he worked. She nodded. "I used a flat rock mostly and a broken board from our wagon. The ground was like iron. Your father would be grateful for what you did. That kind of labor, that kind of devotion, it matters." "Does it?" Her voice was bitter. "They are still dead and I am still alone." Isaac tied off the last bandage and looked up at her. "You are not alone right now." Something shifted in her expression, a tiny crack in the wall of grief she had built around herself. "You do not even know me, Mr. Quinn. Why would you help me?" "Because somebody helped me once when I needed it," he said simply. "And because it is the right thing to do." He stood and moved to his horse, checking the cinch and stirrups. "The gelding can carry us both for the distance we need to cover today. It is about 30 miles to Butte from here. We will make camp tonight and arrive tomorrow afternoon." "I should get my things from the wagon," Delilah said, turning back toward the river. "What little is left, lead the way." The wagon was half a mile upstream, and Isaac felt his jaw tighten when he saw it. The canvas cover had been shredded, either by scavengers or deliberately, and the contents were scattered across the ground. Delilah's face remained carefully blank as she picked through the wreckage, gathering a few items of clothing, a small leather-bound book, and a locket on a thin gold chain. "This was my mother's," she said, clutching the locket. "She died when I was 12 back in Ohio. My father never stopped grieving her, not really. Perhaps that is why the fever took him so quickly. Perhaps he was ready to join her." Isaac helped her bundle what could be salvaged into a blanket, which he tied behind his saddle. There were 3 graves nearby, marked with crude crosses made from wagon boards, and Delilah stood before them for a long moment. "Should I say something?" she asked quietly. "Say what is in your heart." She was silent for a while, and Isaac waited, holding the horse's reins and giving her privacy with her grief. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady despite the tears on her face. "Papa, Tommy, Uncle Robert, I am going to Butte like we planned. I am going to find Uncle Daniel and make something of myself, make you proud. I will never forget you, any of you. You gave me everything, taught me to be strong, to be kind, to never give up." Her voice broke slightly. "I hope you are with Mama now, Papa. I hope you have found peace." When she turned back to Isaac, her eyes were red but her chin was lifted with determination. "I am ready." He helped her mount the horse, then swung up behind her, settling carefully so as not to crowd her. She stiffened at the proximity, but he kept his distance as much as the saddle would allow, one arm reaching around her to hold the reins while the other rested on his thigh. "Hold onto the saddle horn," he instructed. "The gelding is steady, but the ground can be rough." They rode in silence for the first hour, Delilah's back ramrod straight with tension. But as the sun climbed higher and the rhythm of the horse's gait became hypnotic, Isaac felt her begin to relax incrementally. The country they passed through was wild and beautiful, rolling grasslands broken by stands of cottonwood and pine, with mountains rising purple in the distance. "Have you lived in Montana long?" Delilah asked eventually, the first words she had spoken since they left the wagon. "All my life. My father claimed land here in 1867, right after the Homestead Act. I was just a baby then. He built the ranch from nothing, ran cattle and broke horses. It was a hard life, but he loved it. He died 2 years back. Heart gave out while he was mending fence. I found him that evening when he did not come back for supper." Isaac paused, the memory still sharp. "My mother had already passed by then and my sister moved away, so it was just me and the ranch." "I am sorry," Delilah said softly. "It seems we have both known loss. Seems so. They rode on, and Isaac found himself acutely aware of her presence, the way she smelled like wood smoke and river water, the way her hair caught the sunlight when the wind lifted it. He pushed the thoughts away, reminding himself that she was grieving, vulnerable, and under his protection. She deserved respect and help, nothing more. But when they stopped to rest the horse around midday, and he helped her down from the saddle, his hands lingering perhaps a moment too long on her waist, he saw something flicker in her eyes that was not entirely gratitude. "There is a spring just over that rise," he said, clearing his throat. "Good water. We should fill the canteens and let the horse drink." The spring bubbled up clear and cold from between rocks covered in green moss, and they both drank deeply, the water tasting of minerals and snow melt. Isaac unsaddled the gelding to let it rest, and Delilah sat on a sun-warmed rock, watching him work. "You are kind to your horse," she observed. "A man's horse can mean the difference between life and death out here. Kindness is practical." He sat down on another rock, pulling jerky and hardtack from his pack. "It is not much, but it will keep us going." They ate in companionable silence, and Isaac noticed that some color had returned to Delilah's face, that her hands no longer trembled quite so badly. The shock was wearing off, leaving behind the deeper, slower ache of grief, but also the stirrings of survival instinct. "What will you do if your uncle cannot be found?" he asked carefully. Delilah looked down at her bandaged hands. "I can read and write and cipher. I can cook and sew and tend gardens. Surely there is some work in Butt for someone with those skills." "There is work, sure enough. But Butt is a mining town, Miss Lancaster. It is rough and full of men with more money than sense and less honor than they should have. A woman alone, a pretty woman especially, she would face difficulties." She met his eyes directly. "Are you saying I am pretty, Mr. Quinn, or warning me that others will think so?" Isaac felt heat rise in his face. "I'm saying you should be careful, that is all." A ghost of a smile touched her lips, the first he had seen from her. "I will be careful, and I am not as helpless as I might seem right now. My father taught me to shoot, and my brother taught me to fight dirty if I needed to." "Good. A woman should know how to defend herself." He stood, brushing crumbs from his lap. "We should move on. I want to make another 15 miles before we camp for the night." The afternoon passed in a blur of landscape and quiet conversation. Delilah asked about the ranch, and Isaac found himself talking more than he had in months, describing the small herd of cattle he was building, the cabin his father had built with logs hauled from the mountains, the spring that never ran dry, even in the driest summers. "It sounds peaceful," she said. "It is. Lonely sometimes, but peaceful. You never wish for company? A wife, perhaps children?" Isaac was quiet for a long moment. "I wish for it sometimes, but ranching is hard work with little profit, especially these last few years." "What woman would want that life when she could have easier in town?" "Some women value things other than ease," Delilah said quietly. They made camp that evening in a grove of cottonwoods near a creek, and Isaac built a small fire while Delilah tended to the horse, running her bandaged hands over its coat with surprising competence. "You know horses," Isaac observed as he coaxed flames from dry grass and kindling. "My father raised them, back in Ohio before we decided to head west. I grew up in the stables." She smiled sadly. "Tommy, my brother, he was going to start his own breeding operation once we got to Montana. He had it all planned out which bloodlines he wanted to cross, how he would build the barns." "How old was he?" 22. "Just a year younger than me." She came to sit by the fire, holding her hands out to the warmth. The night was coming on fast, and with it a chill that sank into the bones. "He was going to be married too. A girl back in Ohio, Sarah Crawford." She was planning to come out next spring once he had established himself. I suppose I should write to her, tell her what happened. That would be kind. Isaac made coffee in his battered pot, strong and black, and they shared it from his single cup, passing it back and forth in the firelight. The intimacy of the gesture was not lost on him, the way their fingers brushed when she handed it back, the fact that her lips had touched the rim before his. "Tell me about your family," she said. "Not the sad parts, but the good memories." So he did. He told her about his mother's singing, how she had known every hymn and folk song ever written, how she would sing while she worked until the whole valley seemed filled with music. He told her about his father's laugh, rare but genuine, and the way he could gentle the wildest horse with patience and kindness. He told her about his sister, Margaret, who had been his best friend growing up, who had married a lawyer and moved to Sacramento and sent letters full of stories about city life that seemed like tales from another world. In turn, Delilah told him about Ohio, about the farm where she had grown up, about her mother's flower garden that had been the envy of the county, about her father's steady presence and her brother's terrible jokes. She talked until her voice grew hoarse and her eyes heavy, and Isaac found himself watching the firelight play across her face, thinking that even grief-stricken and exhausted, she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. "You should sleep," he said finally. "I will keep watch." "You need sleep too." "I will rest later. You are safe here, Miss Lancaster. I give you my word." She looked at him for a long moment, and something passed between them that was more than words, a understanding, a recognition. Then she nodded and curled up in the blanket he offered, using the saddle as a pillow, and within minutes her breathing had deepened into sleep. Isaac sat by the fire and listened to the night sounds, the creek babbling over stones, an owl calling from the cottonwoods, the distant howl of a coyote. He thought about the woman sleeping a few feet away, about how her presence had shifted something in his world, about how he had sat down beside her at dawn, and somehow knew he would never be quite the same. The next morning dawned clear and cold, frost sparkling on the grass like scattered diamonds. Isaac woke Delilah gently, and they broke camp in the quiet efficiency of people who understood the value of an early start. She seemed better today, steadier, and when she smiled at something he said about the gelding's stubborn streak, the smile reached her eyes. They made good time, and by early afternoon the mountains that cradled Butte came into view, and then the town itself, sprawling and raw and full of the energy that came from wealth being pulled from the ground. The streets were muddy with spring runoff and traffic, lined with false-fronted buildings that proclaimed themselves hotels, saloons, mercantiles, assay offices. Men in work clothes moved in groups, and the air smelled of smoke and horses and ambition. Isaac guided the gelding through the chaos, noting the way Delilah looked around with wide eyes. This was nothing like the quiet farmland she had come from, nothing like the pristine wilderness they had ridden through. This was civilization in its rawest, most vital form. "Where would a mercantile be?" she asked. "Main Street most likely, though there are probably a dozen of them now. What was your uncle's name again?" "Daniel Lancaster." They stopped at a hotel, and Isaac helped Delilah dismount before going inside to ask the clerk about a mercantile owned by anyone named Lancaster. The man behind the desk, a thin fellow with spectacles and ink-stained fingers, thought for a moment before nodding. "Lancaster's Dry Goods, down on Main Street near the bank. Old man Lancaster, he has been here since before the big copper strike, does good business." Isaac felt relief wash over him. At least that part would be easy. He thanked the clerk and returned to Delilah, who was waiting by the horse. "Your uncle is here, has a store on Main Street." The relief on her face was profound, but it was mixed with apprehension. What if he does not want me? What if he cannot take me in? Then we will figure something else out, Isaac said firmly. But let us not borrow trouble. Come on. Lancaster's Dry Goods was a solid building with large windows displaying everything from tools to fabric to canned goods. A bell jangled as they entered, and a man looked up from behind the counter. He was perhaps 50, with gray threading his dark hair and a weathered face that spoke of hard years, but his eyes were kind. "Help you folks?" he asked. "Are you Daniel Lancaster?" Delilah asked, her voice tight with nervousness. "I am. Who is asking?" "I am Delilah Lancaster." "Your brother Robert's daughter." The man went very still, his eyes widening. "Delilah, little Delilah from Ohio, but you were just a child when I last saw you." "That was 13 years ago, Uncle Daniel. I am 23 now." He came around the counter slowly, studying her face. "You have your mother's eyes, God rest her soul. Where is Robert? Where is young Thomas? Are they here in town?" Delilah's face crumpled, and Isaac stepped closer instinctively, his hand hovering near her shoulder. "They passed, sir. Fever took them on the trail about 4 days ago. Miss Lancaster buried them herself." The color drained from Daniel Lancaster's face. "All of them, Robert and Thomas both." "Yes, sir," Delilah whispered. "It was fast, the fever. There was nothing I could do." "Oh, my dear child." Daniel moved forward and pulled her into his arms, and she broke down sobbing against his shoulder while Isaac stood back, feeling suddenly like an intruder on this moment of family grief. "My brother, my poor brother. He wrote to me, said they were coming, that he wanted to start fresh out here. I was so looking forward to seeing him again." They stood like that for a long time, uncle and niece clinging to each other while years of separation and sudden loss poured out in tears. Finally, Daniel pulled back, holding Delilah at arm's length. "You are staying with me, of course. I have a house behind the store, plenty of room. You are family, Delilah, the only family I have left." His eyes found Isaac over her shoulder. "And who might you be, young man?" "Isaac Quinn, sir." "I found your niece by the river yesterday morning, brought her to Butt as I was headed this way anyway." Daniel's expression shifted to something more assessing. "Found her by the river, alone." "I was grieving," Delilah said quickly, pulling away from her uncle and wiping her eyes. "Mr. Quinn was kind enough to offer protection for the journey. He has been nothing but honorable, uncle. I would not be here safely without him." "Then I owe you a debt of gratitude, Mr. Quinn." Daniel extended his hand and Isaac shook it, feeling the strength in the older man's grip. "A young woman alone on these roads, it does not bear thinking about. You have my sincere thanks." "No debt needed, sir. I am just glad she found you." "Where is your ranch, Mr. Quinn?" "About 10 miles west of town, up in the foothills. Quinn Ranch, been in my family since 1867. "I know the place, or I know of it. Your father dealt with me some, bought supplies now and again. A good man, as I recall. I was sorry to hear of his passing." "Thank you, sir." There was an awkward pause, and Isaac realized this was his moment to leave, to tip his hat and walk out of Delilah Lancaster's life as suddenly as he had entered it. The thought sent an unexpected pang through his chest. "Well," he said, "I should be getting on. I have been away from the ranch for near a month. No doubt there is work piling up." "Wait." Delilah stepped forward, her eyes searching his face. "I never properly thanked you. You saved my life, Mr. Quinn, or at least you saved me from despair and danger. I will never forget your kindness." "You owe me nothing, Miss Lancaster. I am just glad you are safe." He touched the brim of his hat. "Take care of yourself." He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him at the door. "Will you come back? To visit, I mean." "I would like to know you are well, to perhaps repay your kindness with a home-cooked meal if nothing else." Isaac looked back at her, at the hope and something else in her eyes, and felt his carefully maintained distance crumbling. "I come to town for supplies every few weeks. Perhaps I will stop by. Please do." He nodded and walked out into the afternoon sunlight, his heart doing strange things in his chest. He told himself it was just satisfaction at a job well done, at having helped someone in need. He told himself the ache he felt was just fatigue from the trail. He told himself he was a fool for already counting the days, until he would have an excuse to come back to town. The ranch, when he finally reached it as the sun was setting, looked exactly as he had left it. The cabin solid and weathered, the barn needing repairs, the corrals empty except for his few remaining horses. It should have felt like coming home. Instead, it felt oddly hollow, as if something essential was missing. Isaac threw himself into work, repairing fence lines, checking on his scattered cattle, breaking a green horse that a neighbor had asked him to train. He rose with the sun and worked until his muscles screamed, trying to exhaust himself enough that he would not lie awake thinking about dark eyes and a voice made husky with tears. But every night, lying in his bunk with the stars visible through gaps in the roof he kept meaning to fix, he thought about her anyway. He wondered if she was settling in with her uncle, if she was healing from her grief, if she ever thought about the cowboy who had sat down beside her at dawn. 3 weeks passed before he made the trip to town, needing supplies and using that as an excuse, even though he could have stretched his stores another week or two. He told himself he was just checking on her welfare, being neighborly. He told himself there was nothing more to it than that. Lancaster's dry goods was busy when he arrived, several miners waiting to be served, but Daniel looked up when the bell jangled and smiled with recognition. "Mr. Quinn, good to see you. I will be with you shortly. No rush." Isaac browsed the store, noting the orderly shelves and reasonable prices. Daniel Lancaster ran a good business, honest and fair, exactly the kind of establishment a town like Butte needed. As he was examining a new style of bit, a door at the back of the store opened, and Delilah emerged carrying a crate of canned goods. She looked different better. Her hair was neatly pinned up, and she wore a simple but well-made dress in dark blue that brought out the color of her eyes. The haunted look had faded somewhat, replaced by the focused competence of someone at work. Then she saw him, and her face lit up in a way that made Isaac's breath catch. "Mr. Quinn." She set down the crate and came toward him, wiping her hands on her apron. "You came back." "Needed supplies," he said, then felt foolish for the transparent excuse. "And I wanted to see how you were settling in. Come have coffee with me. Uncle Daniel can mind the store for a bit." She did not wait for an answer, just took his hand and pulled him toward the back room, through a small office and out into a tidy house that smelled of baking bread and lemon oil. The kitchen was warm and bright, with copper pots hanging from hooks and curtains that had clearly been sewn by someone who cared about such things. "Did you do this?" he asked, gesturing at the transformation. He remembered Daniel mentioning the house had been bachelor quarters for years. "I needed to keep busy," Delilah said, pouring coffee from a pot on the stove. "Uncle Daniel has been wonderful, but I cannot just sit and grieve. Work helps." "I understand that." They sat at the kitchen table, and Isaac found himself relaxing in a way he rarely did around other people. There was something about Delilah, something that made him feel seen and understood without having to explain himself. "Tell me about your ranch," she said. "How are things going?" So he did, and she listened with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions about cattle and horses, about water rights and grazing land. She had not forgotten her father's lessons, that much was clear. "It sounds lonely," she said finally. "It is sometimes, but it is mine, you know." My father built it, and I am building on what he started. There is satisfaction in that, even when it is hard. I understand. Uncle Daniel is letting me help with the store, and there is satisfaction in that too, in learning the business, in helping customers. But I miss the land, miss working with horses. She smiled wistfully. I know that probably sounds foolish. It does not sound foolish at all. They talked for over an hour, until Daniel called out that he needed Delilah's help with inventory, and Isaac realized he had spent far longer than intended. But as he rode back to the ranch that evening, his supplies loaded and his heart lighter than it had been in weeks, he knew he would find excuses to return, and he did. He came back 2 weeks later, then 10 days after that, then a week after that, until it became a pattern, a rhythm they both anticipated. Sometimes they talked in the kitchen while she baked or prepared meals. Sometimes they walked through town together, drawing curious looks from the locals who had begun to notice the cowboy's regular visits. Once, she rode out to the ranch with him, wanting to see the place he had described so often, and Isaac felt absurdly proud showing her the cabin and the land, pointing out improvements he planned to make. "It is beautiful," she said, standing on the porch and looking out over the valley. "I can see why you love it." "It would be more beautiful with a woman's touch," he said, then felt his face heat at the implication. "I mean, it is pretty rough living, no proper garden or anything." Delilah turned to look at him, and there was something calculating in her gaze, something that made his pulse quicken. "I could help you plan a garden if you wanted. I know what grows well in this climate. I would like that." She came back the next week with sketches and a list of seeds, and they spent the afternoon marking out where raised beds would go, where to plant the fruit trees she insisted he needed, where a chicken coop should be built. Isaac found himself watching her more than helping, captivated by the way she moved, the way she gestured when she was excited, the way she bit her lip when she was thinking. "You are staring," she said without looking at him. "Sorry." "Do not be sorry, just tell me why." Isaac took a breath, knowing this was a moment that mattered, that would change things one way or another. "I am staring because you are the most interesting, most beautiful woman I have ever known, and I find it hard to look away." Delilah straightened slowly, her eyes finding his. "Isaac Quinn, are you courting me?" "I would like to be, if you would allow it." She walked toward him, closing the distance between them until they stood close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, could smell the lavender soap she used. "I would allow it," she said softly. "I have been hoping you would ask." "You have. Did you think I invited every customer for coffee and made them my special bread? Did you think I sketched gardens for just anyone?" Isaac felt a laugh bubble up from his chest, surprised and delighted. "I thought you were being friendly." "I was being friendly. I was also hoping you would notice I care for you." She reached up and touched his face, her palm warm against his stubbled cheek. "You sat down beside me when I had lost everything and you never left. How could I not care for you?" He kissed her then, gentle and careful, giving her room to pull away if she wished. But she did not pull away. She leaned into him, her hands sliding up to his shoulders, and kissed him back with a sweetness that made his head spin. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I am not a rich man, Delilah. This ranch, it is all I have, and some years it barely keeps me fed. I cannot offer you luxury or ease. I do not want luxury or ease. I want a life that matters, work that has purpose, a man who sees me as a partner, not property. Can you offer me that?" "I can, I will, I swear it." "Then that is all I need." They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms while the sun climbed higher and the land stretched out around them full of possibility. When they finally returned to town that evening, riding together on his gelding just like that first day. Isaac stopped at Lancaster's dry goods and asked Daniel for permission to court his niece properly. Daniel, who had clearly seen this coming, smiled and gave his blessing with one condition. "You treat her right, Isaac Quinn. She has been through enough heartbreak. You give her joy or you answer to me." "I intend to give her everything good I have in me, sir. You have my word." The courtship unfolded through summer and into fall, a season of discovery and deepening feeling. Isaac taught Delilah to shoot better than her father had, to read the weather in the clouds, to gentle a horse with patience rather than force. She taught him to cook something besides beans and bacon, to appreciate music. She would sing sometimes while working, and he realized where his mother's love of song had come from, that bone-deep human need to add beauty to labor. They attended a barn dance in September, and Isaac held her close while a fiddle player worked magic with his bow, feeling like the luckiest man in Montana territory. They picnicked by the river where he had first found her, and she told him it no longer felt like a place of grief, but a place where her new life had begun. "I think about that morning," she said, lying on the blanket with her head on his shoulder, watching clouds drift past. "I was so lost, so certain I had nothing left to live for, and then you appeared like something out of a story." "I almost rode past," Isaac admitted. "I was tired and wanted to get home, but something made me stop." "Fate," Delilah said firmly. "It was fate." Maybe it was. In October, Isaac rode to town with a ring in his pocket, a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. He found Delilah in the store, helping a customer select fabric, and waited with barely contained nervousness until the woman left. "Walk with me," he asked. She took off her apron and called to her uncle that she was stepping out, then took Isaac's arm and let him lead her through town and up a hill that overlooked Butte and the valley beyond. The aspens were golden, and the air had the crisp feel of coming winter. "I have been thinking," Isaac started, then stopped, suddenly uncertain how to put into words everything he felt. "That sounds dangerous," Delilah teased gently. "I have been thinking that this ranch of mine, it is too big for one person, too quiet. It needs life, needs laughter, needs all the things that make a house a home. Does it now?" He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "What I am trying to say badly is that I love you, Delilah Lancaster. I have loved you since that morning by the river, though I did not know it then. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it." He pulled out the ring, his hands trembling slightly. "Will you marry me? Will you come to the ranch and build a life with me, for better or worse, richer or poorer, all of it?" Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling, radiant in the autumn sunlight. "Yes. Yes, Isaac Quinn, I will marry you. I love you too, so much it frightens me sometimes." He slipped the ring on her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all these years for her hand specifically. Then he kissed her, long and deep, pouring everything he felt into that kiss while the wind whispered through the golden aspens, and the world seemed to hold its breath. They married in November, a small ceremony in the church on Main Street with Daniel giving Delilah away and Isaac's few close friends in attendance. Margaret could not make it from California in time, but she sent a letter full of joy and congratulations and promises to visit in the spring. Delilah wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Daniel had ordered special from San Francisco, and Isaac wore his best suit, brushed and pressed until it looked almost respectable. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Isaac lifted her veil to kiss her, he felt something settle into place in his soul, a rightness that had been missing his whole life. The wedding supper was held in the hotel dining room, and half the town seemed to show up, bringing food and well wishes. Daniel gave a toast that had everyone misty-eyed, talking about his brother Robert and how proud he would have been to see his daughter so happy. Isaac gave a brief speech thanking everyone and promising to take good care of his wife, and Delilah laughed and said she would be taking good care of him too. "Thank you very much," to general applause. They spent their wedding night in the hotel, in a room Daniel had reserved and decorated with flowers. Isaac was nervous, worried about being too rough, too eager, but Delilah came to him with equal parts shyness and passion, and they learned each other slowly, tenderly, until nervousness gave way to wonder. "My husband," she whispered in the darkness, her head on his chest. "My wife," he replied, still marveling at the words. They moved to the ranch the next morning, loading Delilah's few possessions into a wagon Daniel provided as a wedding gift. The house was clean but bare, and Delilah walked through it with assessing eyes, already planning, already seeing what it could become. "We will need curtains," she announced. "And a proper table, this one is falling apart. And shelving, lots of shelving. Oh, and we should whitewash the walls before winter sets in properly." Isaac leaned against the doorframe, watching her with a bemused smile. "Anything else?" "A bigger bed," she said, blushing but meeting his eyes. "That bunk is fine for one, but we are two now." "We are," he agreed, pulling her into his arms. "And that bigger bed just became my top priority." They worked together through that first winter, transforming the bachelor cabin into a home. Delilah sewed curtains from fabric. She had saved money to buy bright, cheerful colors that made the rooms feel warm even on the coldest days. Isaac built her a pine table, sanding it smooth and rubbing it with oil until it glowed. They whitewashed the walls together, laughing when Delilah got more paint on herself than the wood, and Isaac kissed the smudge off her nose. Evenings were spent by the fire, Delilah sewing or reading while Isaac whittled or worked on tack that needed mending. Sometimes they would just talk, sharing stories from their pasts, making plans for the future. Other times they would sit in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes when two people are completely at ease with each other. Winter nights were long and cold, but their bed was warm, and they took comfort in each other, learning the languages of touch and whisper, of shared pleasure and tender affection. Isaac had never known this kind of intimacy, this bone-deep connection with another person, and it amazed him how Delilah fit into his life as if she had always been there. Spring came, and with it, the work of planting the garden Delilah had planned. They built raised beds and hauled in good soil, planted seeds and seedlings, erected a fence to keep out deer and rabbits. Isaac built the chicken coop he had promised, and Delilah bought 6 hens from a farmer on the other side of the valley. She named each one, which Isaac found absurd and charming in equal measure. "They are chickens, Delilah. You are going to eat them eventually. These are layers, not meat birds, and they deserve names. This one is Henrietta, and that is Beatrice, and the little spotted one is Dottie." "Of course she is," Isaac said, but he was smiling. The garden flourished under Delilah's care, neat rows of vegetables and herbs, and she canned and preserved everything they did not eat fresh. The root cellar filled with jars of beans and tomatoes and pickles, with braids of onions and garlic hanging from the rafters, with potatoes and carrots buried in sand. Isaac looked at the stores and felt a pride and security he had never known as a bachelor. That summer, a neighbor approached Isaac about partnering on a small horse breeding operation, and Isaac brought the proposal to Delilah, wanting her input. They discussed it over dinner, weighing the risks and potential profits, and decided together to move forward. It was a small thing, but it mattered to Isaac that they were making these decisions as partners, that he valued her opinion and she felt free to give it. The horses did well, and by fall they had sold 2 colts for good prices and had contracts for the following year. The ranch was beginning to prosper in a way it never had when Isaac ran it alone, and he knew much of that was due to Delilah's good sense and hard work. That winter, Delilah began feeling ill in the mornings, and Isaac worried she had caught some sickness. But when she finally confessed what she suspected, her eyes shining with hope and fear, Isaac felt his heart nearly burst. "A baby. We are having a baby, I think so. It is early yet, but all the signs are there." He picked her up and spun her around, laughing and crying at the same time, then set her down carefully as if she might break. "Are you happy? Is this what you want?" "It is everything I want," she said, touching his face. "A child, our child, growing up here in this place we have built together." How could I not want that? The pregnancy was not easy. Delilah was sick for months, and there were days when she could barely keep water down, let alone food. Isaac was terrified, memories of his mother's death in childbirth surfacing, but Delilah was stubborn and strong. She pushed through, and by the time spring came around again, she was glowing with health and roundness, her belly swelling with their child. Isaac became protective to the point of absurdity, insisting she rest constantly, doing all the heavy work himself. Delilah bore his hovering with good humor until the day she found him trying to do the laundry and put her foot down. "Isaac Quinn, I am pregnant, not an invalid. I need to move to work or I will go mad. Please stop treating me like I might shatter." "I am just worried," he admitted. "My mother, she died having my sister. What if something happens to you?" Delilah took his hands and placed them on her belly where their child moved and kicked. "Feel that. That is life, strong and determined. I am strong too, stronger than you think. I am not going anywhere, promise me." "I promise. Now let me do the washing and you go see to that fence in the north pasture before the cattle find the weak spots." He went, but he worried anyway, right up until the day in late July when Delilah woke him before dawn with a hand on his shoulder and a quiet statement that it was time. Isaac rode to town at a gallop, bringing back the midwife, a sturdy German woman named Frau Schneider who had delivered half the babies in the county. Then he paced, helpless and terrified, while sounds came from the bedroom that made his blood run cold. Daniel arrived, having been alerted by Frau Schneider's husband, and sat with Isaac on the porch, offering whiskey and stories about his own children, long grown and moved away. "The waiting is the worst part," Daniel said. "But Delilah is strong, Isaac. She will come through this." The sun was setting when the baby's cry finally split the air, thin and outraged, and the most beautiful sound Isaac had ever heard. He leaped to his feet, but Frau Schneider emerged and held up a hand. "Give me a moment to clean up, then you can come in. You have a son, Mr. Quinn." A big, healthy boy. A son. Isaac felt tears streaming down his face and did not care who saw. Daniel clapped him on the back, grinning. "Congratulations, my boy. Welcome to fatherhood." When Isaac finally entered the bedroom, Delilah was propped up on pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up as he approached, her smile tired but genuine. "Come meet your son." Isaac sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the small face peeking out from the blankets. The baby had a shock of dark hair and eyes that might turn any color, and he was the most perfect thing Isaac had ever seen. "He is beautiful," Isaac whispered. "You are beautiful." "Thank you, Delilah. Thank you for this gift." "We made him together," she said, placing the baby in Isaac's arms. "He is part of both of us." The weight of his son in his arms was both terrifying and grounding. Isaac touched the tiny hand, marveling when miniature fingers curled around his calloused one. "What should we name him?" Delilah asked. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at his son, Isaac knew exactly what felt right. "Thomas," he said, "after your brother. Thomas Robert Quinn, to honor both your brother and your father." Delilah's eyes filled with tears. "You would do that. They should be here to see this, to see you and this beautiful child. Since they cannot be, we will carry them with us." "Is that all right?" "It is perfect," she said, reaching up to touch his face. "You are perfect." Little Thomas was a good baby, healthy and curious, and he transformed the ranch completely. The house that had once echoed with emptiness now rang with cries and gurgles and laughter. Isaac found himself hurrying through his work so he could get back to the house and hold his son, marveling at every new expression, every small change. Delilah recovered quickly, much to Isaac's relief, and soon she was back to managing the household and garden with Thomas strapped to her back in a sling she had sewn. She sang to him while she worked, the same songs her mother had sung to her, and Isaac would sometimes stop what he was doing just to listen, his heart so full he could barely breathe. That fall, Margaret finally made the trip from California with her husband and 2 daughters, and the ranch was full of family for the first time in years. The cousins cooed over baby Thomas, and Margaret pulled Isaac aside with tears in her eyes. "You did it," she said. "You built the life Papa dreamed of, the family he wanted for you. He would be so proud." "I hope so," Isaac said. "I am trying to be the man he raised me to be." "You are. And that woman you married, Isaac, she is remarkable. Hold on to her." "I intend to. She is everything to me." The years unfolded in a blur of work and joy, of small triumphs and occasional setbacks. The ranch continued to prosper, the horse breeding operation growing until they had a reputation for quality animals throughout the territory. Isaac and Delilah worked side by side, partners in every sense of the word, and their love deepened with each passing season. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved horses as much as his parents did. When he was 4, Delilah became pregnant again, and this time the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to do. They welcomed a daughter in the spring of 1884, a tiny girl with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin. They named her Margaret Rose after Isaac's sister and Delilah's mother. "Now we have one of each," Delilah said, nursing the baby while Thomas peered at his sister with suspicious curiosity. "Our family is complete." "Is it?" Isaac asked, and she laughed. "For now, at least. Ask me again in a few years." They did have one more, a surprise baby born 3 years later when they thought they were done. Another son, wild and reckless from the day he entered the world, who they named Daniel after Delilah's uncle. The old man cried when he heard, and he doted on his namesake shamelessly. The children grew up surrounded by love and purpose, learning to ride and read, to work hard and treat people fairly. Thomas showed an aptitude for training horses that made Isaac proud. Margaret had her mother's head for numbers and eventually took over managing the ranch accounts. And little Daniel, he had the biggest heart of them all, forever bringing home injured animals and strays that needed care. Isaac and Delilah grew older together, their faces lining and their hair graying, but their love never dimmed. They still sat together by the fire on winter evenings, still danced in the kitchen when the mood struck, still stole kisses when they thought the children were not looking. On their 20th anniversary, Isaac took Delilah back to the place where they first met, the river where he had found her weeping at dawn all those years ago. They sat on the bank in the morning light, and he took her hand. "I have been thinking about that day," he said. "About how I almost rode past, how close I came to missing you entirely." "But you did not ride past," Delilah said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You stopped, and you sat down beside me, and you never left. Best decision I ever made, mine too." saying yes when you asked to help, trusting you when I had no reason to trust anyone. It led to this, to everything we have built." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the water and the birds, wrapped in memories and contentment. The river flowed on as it always had, indifferent to human joy and sorrow, but Isaac felt like it had been blessed somehow, made holy by what had happened here. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "The hardship, the isolation, the endless work. You could have had an easier life in town or gone to California with Margaret, had society and culture and all those things I cannot give you." Delilah pulled back to look at him, her eyes fierce. "Isaac Quinn, you listen to me. This life we have built together, this ranch and these children and this love between us, it is everything I ever wanted and more than I ever dreamed possible. I would not trade a single moment of it, not the hard times or the easy ones. You are my home, and I am exactly where I belong." He kissed her then, long and sweet, tasting coffee and the peppermint she had taken to carrying, tasting 20 years of shared life and many more to come. They walked back to the ranch hand in hand, to the house full of noise and love, to the children who were growing up too fast, to the land that had become as much a part of them as their own hearts. Smoke rose from the chimney, and the horses in the corral whinnied a greeting, and Isaac felt a peace so profound it was almost painful. This was what his father had wanted when he claimed this land all those years ago. This was what Delilah's father had been seeking when he pointed his wagon west. This was what made all the struggle worthwhile, these moments of perfect ordinary happiness. That evening, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Isaac and Delilah sat on the porch watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. He had his arm around her shoulders, and she fit against him as perfectly as she had that first day they rode together. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About how lucky I am. About how a single moment of decision, choosing to stop instead of riding on, changed my entire life." "Changed both our lives," she corrected. "I was lost that morning, Isaac. Not just lost in grief, but lost in the world with no direction, no hope. And then you appeared and you sat down beside me, and you showed me that I was not alone, that there was still goodness in the world. You showed me that too. I did not realize how lonely I was until I met you, how empty my life had become. You filled all those empty spaces with light and love and laughter." She turned in his arms and kissed him, slow and deep. "We saved each other then. We did. And we will keep saving each other every day, for as long as we both shall live. I promise," Isaac said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. The stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had looked down on that river at dawn so many years ago, on a cowboy making the choice to stop, on a woman lost in grief who was about to be found. The same stars that would shine down on their children and grandchildren, on the ranch that would be passed down through generations, on a love story that started with tears and grew into something extraordinary. Inside the house, Thomas called out in his sleep, and Margaret stirred in response. In the barn, the horses settled for the night, and somewhere in the hills a coyote sang to the moon. The ranch breathed with life and possibility, and at the center of it all sat Isaac and Delilah Quinn, still together, still in love, still grateful for that dawn by the river when their stories collided and became one. Years continued to pass in the rhythm of seasons and life, each one adding new layers to their story. Thomas grew tall and strong, eventually courting a young woman from Butte who loved horses as much as he did. They married when he was 22 and she was 20, and built a small house on the edge of the Quinn property, expanding the ranch in both land and family. Margaret proved to have her mother's fierce intelligence and her father's steady determination. She went away to school in Helena, one of the first young women from Butte to do so, and returned with a teaching certificate and plans to open a school for the children of ranching families who lived too far from town for regular education. Isaac and Delilah helped her convert an old barn into a one-room schoolhouse, and within a year she had 15 students and a waiting list. Daniel, their youngest, was different from his siblings. He loved the ranch but felt called to medicine, moved by all the times he had seen neighbors suffer from injuries or illnesses with no doctor within reach. At 17, he left for medical school in the East, and though Delilah cried for days after he departed, she was fiercely proud of his ambition and determination. "He will come back," Isaac assured her, holding her while she wept. "This land is in his blood. He will come back and be the doctor this valley needs." And Isaac was right. Daniel returned 4 years later with his degree and a gentle wife named Elizabeth, and set up practice in Butte while maintaining close ties to the ranch that had shaped him. He delivered his nieces and nephews, tended broken bones and fevers, and became beloved throughout the county. Isaac and Delilah became grandparents 9 times over, and their house was perpetually full of children learning to ride, learning to garden, learning the values of hard work and family that had built the Quinn Ranch. They grew older gracefully, their bodies slowing but their minds and hearts remaining sharp and full. On their 30th anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration that lasted 3 days. There was dancing and music, enormous meals, and story after story about Isaac and Delilah, about their courtship and early years, about the legacy they had built not just in land and livestock but in love and values passed down through generations. Speech. Someone called during the final dinner, and everyone took up the cry until Isaac stood, holding up his hands for quiet. "I am not much for speeches," he began, his voice rough with age and emotion. "But I will say this. 43 years ago, I found a woman weeping by a river at dawn. I sat down beside her, and in a very real way, I never left her side. Every choice I have made since that morning has been shaped by her, improved by her, blessed by her presence in my life." He looked down at Delilah, who was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "You gave me everything, Delilah Quinn. You gave me love and children and purpose. You turned a lonely cabin into a home, a struggling ranch into a legacy, a lost man into someone whole and happy. I have loved you every day for 30 years, and I will love you every day that remains to us." The room erupted in applause and cheers, but Isaac only had eyes for his wife, who stood and came to him, letting him fold her into his arms while their family celebrated around them. "I love you too," she whispered against his chest. "My cowboy, my husband, my heart. Thank you for stopping that morning. Thank you for staying. Nowhere else I would rather be." They danced that night slowly and carefully, their bodies knowing the steps even if they moved differently now. The grandchildren watched with fascination, seeing in their grandparents' careful movements and tender glances a glimpse of what true, lasting love looked like. Isaac and Delilah lived another 15 years after that celebration. Years marked by both joy and sorrow, new great-grandchildren and the loss of old friends, the small triumphs and disappointments that make up a life fully lived. They were never apart for more than a day or two, still preferring each other's company to anyone else's, still finding new things to talk about and old stories to revisit. When Isaac's health began to fail in the winter of his 77th year, it was Delilah who nursed him with fierce devotion, refusing to accept that their time was ending. But Isaac knew, and one morning when the snow lay thick on the ground and the world was hushed and white, he called his family to his bedside. They came, all of them, filling the room with their presence and their love. Isaac looked at each face, seeing his legacy reflected in their features, their values, their devotion to each other and the land. "I am not afraid," he told them. "I have lived a good life, better than I ever imagined possible. You make me proud, all of you. Take care of each other, take care of this land, and remember that love is always worth the risk." "Papa, do not," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "It is all right, son. We all have our time, and mine has been blessed beyond measure." He turned to Delilah, who sat beside him holding his hand, her face wet with tears. "My Delilah, my river girl, thank you for saying yes. Thank you for building this life with me." "I would do it all again," she said fiercely. "Every moment, every choice, all of it. You are my greatest love, Isaac Quinn, and you are mine. Always have been, always will be." He closed his eyes then, still holding her hand, and slipped away, peacefully surrounded by the family they had created together. The grief was overwhelming, but underneath, it ran a current of gratitude for a life well lived, for love that had sustained and transformed. Delilah lived another 3 years, watched over by her children and grandchildren who made sure she was never alone. She remained in the house she had made a home, tending her garden and telling stories about Isaac to anyone who would listen. She spoke of him in the present tense, as if he had just stepped out and would be back any moment, and perhaps in her heart he was always there. On a spring morning when the aspens were leafing out and the river ran high with snowmelt, Delilah asked Thomas to take her back to the place where she had met Isaac all those years ago. He drove her in a wagon, moving carefully over the rough ground, and helped her walk to the bank where she had sat weeping so long ago. "This is where it all began," she said, settling onto the ground with Thomas's help. "This is where I found hope when I thought there was none left." "It is a good place," Thomas said. "It is a blessed place. Your father stopped here when he could have ridden on. He chose love when he could have chosen ease. And everything good in my life came from that choice, from his kindness and his constancy." She sat there for a long time, eyes closed, face turned toward the sun. Thomas sat with her, quiet and patient, until her breathing changed and he realized she was gone, slipped away as peacefully as Isaac had, drawn perhaps by the call of the man who had sat down beside her and never left. They buried her next to Isaac on a hill overlooking the ranch, and the whole valley seemed to turn out for the funeral. People spoke of her kindness, her strength, her fierce love for family, and her generous spirit toward neighbors in need. But what they spoke of most was the love story, the tale of a cowboy and a grieving woman who found each other at dawn and built something extraordinary from that chance encounter. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through Thomas and then his children, each generation adding their own chapter while honoring the foundation Isaac and Delilah had laid. The house was preserved carefully, and grandchildren who never knew them in life learned their story, learned about the morning by the river, about choosing to stop instead of riding on, about the transformative power of simple kindness and enduring love. On the wall in the main room hung a painting, commissioned by Margaret years ago, showing a sunrise over a river, and if you looked closely you could see 2 figures on the bank, sitting together, the beginning of everything. Below it was a brass plaque that read, "He found her weeping by the river at dawn. The cowboy sat down and never left her side." It became a family legend, a touchstone, a reminder that the most important moments in life often come when we choose connection over convenience, when we sit down beside someone in pain rather than riding past toward our own concerns. The river still flowed, the land still stretched wide and beautiful, and the love story that had started there continued to ripple outward through generations, a testament to the power of 2 hearts choosing each other against all odds. The Quinn Ranch prospered through the decades, weathering droughts and depressions, celebrations and sorrows, but always holding fast to the values Isaac and Delilah had established. Hard work, honest dealing, care for the land, devotion to family. These were not just words carved on a plaque but living principles that shaped how the family moved through the world. Thomas's grandson, another Isaac, eventually wrote a book about his great-grandparents, painstakingly researching and interviewing everyone who had known them, preserving letters and documents, capturing the essence of their story before it faded into pure legend. The book became a local bestseller and then a regional one, and people from all over wrote to say how the story had moved them, had reminded them what mattered most. They were not special people, Isaac the author wrote in his introduction. They were ordinary folks who lived ordinary lives marked by ordinary struggles. What made them extraordinary was their choice to love fully, to commit completely, to build something lasting through daily acts of kindness and care. Their story is not unique except in its particulars. The truth they embodied is universal. Love, real love, is shown not in grand gestures but in the decision to sit down beside someone and never leave. That book found its way into homes across Montana and beyond, and more than one person, reading it late at night or early in the morning, decided to take a chance on love they had been afraid to pursue, to stay when leaving would be easier, to sit down beside someone who needed them. In that way, Isaac and Delilah's legacy spread far beyond their bloodline, touching lives they would never know about, inspiring choices that would echo down through generations. Back at the ranch, life continued in its beautiful, mundane patterns. Spring brought calving and planting. Summer brought long days of work and short nights of rest. Fall brought harvest and preparation for winter's hardships. Winter brought the family together, telling stories around fires, preserving the history that shaped them. And sometimes, on spring mornings when the light was just right, when the river ran high and the air smelled of possibility, someone from the family would walk down to that bank and sit for a while, thinking about beginnings and choices, about a cowboy who stopped when he could have ridden on, about a woman who accepted help when she could have refused it, about the extraordinary life that grew from that simple moment of connection. The land remembered them. The house held echoes of their voices and laughter. The horses carried their bloodlines. The garden grew from seeds descended from plants Delilah first nurtured. And in the hearts of everyone who knew their story, Isaac and Delilah Quinn lived on, forever young, forever in love, forever sitting together by the river at dawn, the moment they chose each other stretching into eternity. It was a good story. More than that, it was a true one, and truth has a power that fiction can never match. Two people found each other when they needed it most, built a life through commitment and care, raised a family steeped in love and values, and left behind a legacy that would endure long after their bones had returned to the Montana soil they loved so well. He found her weeping by the river at dawn. The cowboy sat down and never left her side. And from that simple act of compassion grew a love that changed not just two lives but countless others, rippling outward like water disturbed by a stone, affecting people and places in ways neither Isaac nor Delilah could have imagined that first morning when their eyes met, and their stories became forever entwined. In the end, that is what every life hopes to be: meaningful, connected, part of something larger than itself. Isaac and Delilah achieved that not through wealth or fame or power, but through the simple daily choice to love well, to work hard, to build something lasting, to honor each other and the promises they made. Their great-great-grandchildren still walk the land they claimed and cultivated, still tell their stories, still try to live up to the example they set. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right through the cottonwoods by the river, you can almost hear singing, a woman's voice lifted in an old hymn, and a man's low laughter in response, the sound of a love that death itself could not diminish. Echoing through the valley they made their own, forever and always, amen.